When I moved from Hutto for the last time in 1986, although I knew that change would come, I would not have thought that 25 years later I could pay a toll to drive by and count the subdivisions. My friend Mayor Holland, city officials, Hutto 100 committee members, descendants of the founders, God Morgan. I am pleased to be able to visit with you today about Hutto's founding history and the families who played such an important role in it. In reviewing that history as I prepared for this day, I've been reminded that it takes a village, a community, to make a city. I've but a few minutes to cover a subject that I could talk about for hours. I could tell you some stories, as some of you know, or if you were really interested, we could have a never-ending conversation. I will do the best I can, inevitably leaving out names and anecdotes that should be included. Prior to the stream of Swedish immigrants arriving in the early 1880s, Hutto was still mostly prairie and grazing land. Residents were a collection of ranchers and merchants and tradesmen who had moved to Central Texas primarily from the Old South, seeking opportunity in the West and following the railroad. Familiar families like Hutto, McCutcheon, Farley, Saul, Goodwin, and others. The Swedes' arrival in significant numbers was largely the result of recruitment by men such as Arvid Nelson, S.M. Swinson, and the Palm brothers. They had immigrated to the Austin, Brushy, and Palm Valley areas years before and were actively engaged in the recruitment of more Swedes from the home country. The route to Hutto typically involved young Swedes packing their modest belongings, leaving their families and homeland to take a 3 or 4 week trip on a steamship from Göteborg to Liverpool, England, and then across the Atlantic to New York, then overland through the Midwest, perhaps meeting and being helped by other Swedes who had immigrated earlier, or by boat again from New York to Galveston. Once in Texas, they would locate a friend or relative or their sponsor, men like Nelson and Swinson and the Palms, and work for them to pay for their passage and learn farming. Able to save some money, after 2 or 3 years they could lease land and farm on their own. After leasing for a few years, able to make and save more money, they could buy their own land and establish their own homestead. That was the formula: worker, renter, owner. Among these were my great-grandparents, J.A. and Clara Peterson Johnson, and Andrew and Augusta Spong. J.A. and Clara were married in Sweden in 1880 and arrived in Brushy the same year. He worked for Arvid Nelson for a year to pay for their passage to America and then leased farmland from Andrew Palm until moving to Hutto and buying property in 1890. In 1909, he built the Johnson home in town. The Spongs arrived in 1881 and eventually established a homestead 8 miles north of the city, where they built a classic 2-story home in the Swedish style in 1900. My brother Kurt and I spent most of our boyhood years on that farm, in that farmhouse with our parents Edmund and Dora Priestmeyer Johnson. That house was only one of many that dotted the landscape in every direction, most with a distinctive red barn nearby. The Spong homestead is now part of the Williamson County landfill. Of course, there were many other Swedish families involved in the development of the community, including Andersons, Allgreens, Almquists, Petersons, Carlsons, Gustafson, Handstrom, Ullman, Youngblom, Walleen, Hansen, and too many others to name here, many of whom had their roots in the Brushy and Palm Valley colonies. They tended to be large families. The J.A. Johnsons had 9 sons and 2 daughters. J.A. was one of 8 children of Johann and Hedvig Anderson, who had 66 grandchildren, all of whom engaged in farming for at least part of their lives. These families grew and intermarried. I had classmates and teammates in school who were cousins that I didn't realize were cousins until years later. Inevitably, their common background, challenges, struggles, and deep religious and family convictions must have fostered a deep sense of community. The First Baptist Church, the Swedish Methodist Church, and the Swedish Lutheran Church were all established in 1892 and contributed in a major way, not just to the religious life, but to the educational and social life of the Hutto community as well, all active to this day. All of these pioneers, the ranchers, American settlers, and the Swedes, German, Czech, and other immigrants contributed to making the Hutto community, not just as a place on the map, but in the people-to-people way. This community building preceded the formal founding of the city by 20 years and made the city not only possible, but vibrant and successful. So the early story of Hutto is one of community, a community of different groups with different cultural backgrounds and languages coming together to make something distinctly American and good. In recent years, I have often told friends and business acquaintances who ask about my hometown that I didn't particularly enjoy driving through Hutto because the Hutto I knew was gone, transformed into suburbia, an easy and cynical view for an absent native son to take. As I have traveled Texas in my work and seen the sadly neglected old towns, all or most of their native citizens gone, I have come to appreciate the good fortune that Hutto has enjoyed as a result of growth and progress made possible by an accident of geography, being in an urban growth corridor. And along with that, having the interested citizens with the commitment and resources to preserve the buildings and homes that remain as testament to Hutto's heritage. Mayor Holland lives in the Gunnar and Emma Spong Chalstrom home. Emma Spong was my great aunt. Jeff Phillips' family owns the home of my grandparents, E.S. and Mary Spong Johnson. I want to commend those who have worked so diligently to preserve Hutto's legacy and urge you to continue to do so. I know that the early founders, now long gone, would be appreciative too. On their behalf, I thank you all. Tack så mycket. Finally, I would like to say what those early Swedes must have written to their relatives back in Sweden. Landet är bra och liv är bra I Hutto, Texas. The land is good and life is good in Hutto, Texas. Thank you and God bless Hutto.